This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me, our Falcons analyst, Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, and 11 Alive anchor, Maria Martin. This episode is brought to you by the Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox console. No console actually needed. Head to amazon.com/FireTV Locked On to learn more. And the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So did he save himself? We'll discuss. And yep, he earned it. We'll talk about that too. And did they actually earn the punishment? Did it fit the crime? We'll talk about that and explain as well. But first, apply pressure, yeah. But to who? And for who? Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris have put a big emphasis on upgrading the defensive side of the football this offseason, Jarvis. But now we know the pieces added that are supposed to help get them to there, wherever there is. Of course, we know that's the postseason. But is there even more pressure for starters on the defense to be better, or is there more pressure on the offense to put points on the board as the defense figures it out? Or is there pressure on the offense to put up big numbers because you don't want to be the weakest link after your front office did all that they did to get you some help?
I think there's more pressure on specifically Michael Penix and Zach Robinson to essentially carry this team until the defense gets it figured out, because like we know that the offensive line has that continuity. I mean, we're still trying to figure out who's going to be the center. You know, Ryan Newsel, has he signed his contract or what? We're trying to write a first refusal. Y'all correct me, but I haven't seen anything saying that he signed that deal just yet. So I think that, you know, outside of that, we know what we're getting. We know what to expect from Matthew Bergeron. We know what to expect from Chris Lindstrom. We know what we're going to get from Caleb McGarry, whether you like it or not. And we know what we're going to get with Jake Matthews, you know, being there every game. So I feel like, you know, with the weapons and everything that's on the offensive side of the football, like I said, I put it out there. I put a number on it. I know no one else want to put a number on it. I was like, hey, 26, 27 points a game. I need that because the defense got to figure it out. They got so many moving parts and new pieces over there. So, yeah, I feel like the pressure is on for this offense to be able to carry this team until the defense gets it figured out.
Yeah, and I think that is a fair assessment because you already had the pieces in place. If you didn't, then your draft probably would have looked a little bit differently as well. But looked a little bit different as well. But for you, Maria, when you kind of take a step back and you look at not just the moves that Terry Fontenot, Raheem Morris, and that front office made in the draft, but also in the offseason, for you, do you feel like there's more pressure on this defense to get better and get them there? Is the pressure on the offense? Because, hey, you still have to put points up while this defense and Jeff Ulbrich kind of figures it out. Or is there pressure on the offense to put up those numbers more so because, hey, you don't want to be the weakest link after we allegedly fixed the weakest link?
There's pressure everywhere. There's literally pressure everywhere. There could not be more pressure on the Falcons right now, no matter how you look at it, and especially from the top down. I mean, we've talked about it for months and for weeks. Terry Fontenot, this is about as hot as it gets when it comes to pressure. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like there's pressure on Mike. There's always pressure on a quarterback. But, you know, to Jarvis's point, that side of the ball is a little bit more complete. It's funny, when you go to training camp, it's usually, you guys know, the defense is 2 steps ahead of the offense. It's just kind of how it goes. There's more install on the offensive side of the ball. And now you don't really have as big of a learning curve. You have the same play caller, talking about offensively, you have the same play caller coming over. You've got some moving parts, like TJ Yates is moving on to pass game coordinator, stuff like that. But for the most part, this is their sophomore season together. Like, they had the whole, let's figure out how we're going to call things offensively. Let's figure out what it looks like. I actually even asked TJ Yates that yesterday. I said, how good does it feel that you just, as it sits right now, you don't have a quarterback controversy? Mike's the guy. You can move along with, this is the quarterback of the future. So, you know, for them, it's kind of status quo. And for the defense, there's so many things that look different, right? You talk about the offseason and you bring in some of those guys in free agency. And then obviously, T, you said that the draft speaks for itself. If you thought that side of the ball was A-okay and we're ready to roll, you wouldn't have drafted 4 out of the 5 guys on the defensive side of the football. And there's a lot of different things. Raw, obviously, we know is a defensive guy, but you've got Nate Ollie now, who, oh my gosh, the energy from this guy is insane. I'm so excited to watch what he can do with that defensive line. And you just have a lot of different moving pieces, new faces coming out on the defensive side of the ball. So I would pump the brakes when it comes to you guys have to be elite right away. They're going to do a lot to try to make it look different, but I would expect the offense to be a step ahead. But again, I think pressure's everywhere you look in that building right now.
Yeah, I think that might be one of those all of the aboves, Maria, that you're absolutely right. Free. They're everywhere you look, there's pressure. Hey, Rob, we gave you what you wanted. Jeff Ulbrich, we gave you what you wanted. You got your 4 out of 5 on the defensive side of the ball in the draft. We also gave you some little pieces that you are accustomed to working with or worked with before, like a Leonard Floyd. So yeah, you've got some pressure there. To Maria's point, Michael Penix Jr., you're QB1. That it's a given. You've got pressure on you, but there are parts over there as well. Caleb McGarry, get your game up on the pass rush, if you will. Bijan Robinson, can we see you do it again in year 3? So you've got pieces of pressure on that side of the ball too. But if you had to choose and who had that pressure, if you will, kind of what are you thinking? Are you thinking it's more on the defensive side of the ball? And Terry Fontenot, because hey, you guys went out and got all those pieces, so time to show and prove. Is it on the offensive side of the ball? Because you have the pieces, so do something with it. Or is it on the offensive side of the ball because they went out and got what they did? So you darn sure can't be the weakest link at this point.
Yeah, not to be the cop-out answer and to piggyback off Maria, it is sort of all of the above, but I do think the offense is going to be held to the higher standard just because that's the unit that they basically said, we already built it. It's ready to roll. Let's get this thing cooking. And, for all the reasons with all the first round picks, with the pressure on Michael Penix to prove that he was worth the pick and all the controversy surrounding that, coupled with you sort of the most stability you have on either side of the ball is on that offensive side of the ball, that continuity that you're talking about, a year or 2 jump with Zach Robinson that we've seen consistently from the previous play callers, whether we're talking about Arthur Smith, Dirk Cutter, Steve Sarkisian, or Kyle Shanahan. All those guys saw significant improvements to their offense in their second seasons in Atlanta. I think the pressure is on the offense to play at a higher standard than it is to the defense. I think most people are just like, hey, man, if you can get somewhere close to league average, which probably at this stage, I know, we're all excited and whatnot, but at this stage is probably, a high standard for this defense considering where it was and considering that you're throwing a bunch of young rookies into the fire and these guys are going to have to perform early. And as much as we like this rookie class, as much as we like some of the young talent from the 24 draft and previous drafts, generally speaking, young players don't play particularly well. They're not the most consistent players. And so you're kind of expecting more of a roller coaster with this defense week to week, depending on the matchups. Certain teams they're going to struggle to match up with. Other teams they'll be a better matchup with. But the expectation for the offense is every week you need to be putting up, as Jarvis said, 26, 27 points. That if you look over the last 4 years since the 17-game expansion, if you get to about 24 points a game, 90% of the teams in the last 4 years since they've had 17 games have made the playoffs or had winning records scoring 24 or more points per game. So that's the expectation, that most of these games, if you can get to 24, 27, 28 points, and if the defense can, they can win 28-24 and no one's going to complain about that. So
pinch the quarterback. Just pinch him. Just pinch the quarterback.
Yeah, so I think the standard is higher for the offense, but there is a lot of pressure on the defense just because Raheem Morris is a defensive coach. Jeff Ulbrich is coming in with expectations. You've added all these pieces to the defense. So there is going to be pressure on this defense to perform at a high level, but I do think in general, the expectation is going to be that the offense has to sort of carry the team.
Yeah, and I'm going to split to all of the above, but I need a second to kind of break this down a little bit because I think there are some nuances in the weeds that also kind of give some breadth and some depth to exactly where that pressure, may stand. So in kind of like a different way, right? So guess what? Hey, Maria, Free, JD, we still have KP. Okay, so that said, to me, there's a pressure there. You decided to keep him, so he better sure as hell produce. So I think that's a piece of the pressure. And allow me, JD, I'm gonna go on a little for a second here.
Yeah,
Let
I follow.
me just throw these out there. I think there's pressure on him. I already told you. I think there's pressure on Caleb McGarry because at some point, your pass protection, your pass pro has to catch up with your run pro. I mean, at some point, either that or move it right along. I love what Jarvis always says about competition. So there's pressure at center because there's going to be some competition there. So those are kind of just a couple that stood out to me on the offensive side of the ball. But defensively, I think there's pressure as well because it's like, okay, finally, come on, what are we going to see? Will the real Arnold Ebiketie stand up for the entirety of the season? So that's one where you're looking for him to kind of stand up and do his thing. If there's a decision to keep David Onyemata, you got to do a little bit. Like last year's performance can't be the standard. It just can't be the standard. And I think finally there's some pieces out there like a Taquan Graham, if you will, a Kentavious Street, if you will, and Jarvis's favorite, a Troy Anderson, where it's like, okay, you keep coming back,
We still talking about Troy Anderson? He on the roster?
Don't be mean.
He on the roster?
Shade
Troy's on the roster? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
my bad, team. My fault. I forgot he was on the roster. My
But I
bad.
think, Jarvis,
Totally slipped my mind.
You're making my point. No. You are absolutely making my point. That's the point that I was making for those guys that aren't a part of the 2025 draft class, right? Who aren't a part of the offseason acquisitions in 2025. Maybe you came via draft in 23 or 24. You came via offseason acquisition in 23 or 24. When are you going to be the contributor that the Falcons need in order to just maintain as a middle of the pack defense or maybe slightly above average? So I think for me, that's maybe like that hidden level of pressure, Jarvis, that I just wanted to kind of point out that maybe they're not your top lines as far as where pressure might be, but the hell, like do something and do it consistently. Like we need to see it for all 17 games in order for this Falcons team to say, hey, the entire roster contributed to us finally breaking this postseason drought.
It's certainly a level of pressure for these players too, because hey, Arnold Ebiketie going to a contract here. Can you play on first and second down? That's the question you're gonna have to answer in this contract year. Like that's the beauty of this thing, right? Like because NFL brings pressure. Like pressure either a diamond gonna come out or what else is gonna come out. So I think that's one of the things that you have to kind of look. Yeah, Free, I did say that, make that reference. Yes, don't look at me like that. Come on now. You should know me by now. But I think that's one of the things that, that is beautiful about this game. There is so much pressure when you talk about playing on this level and getting paid a lot of money to be able to do it. And Terry Fontenot making all of these decisions to bring these guys in, picking up the fifth-year option on Kyle Pitts, like you mentioned. I don't know if I would have necessarily did that. I felt like they should have treated him just like they did Caleb McGarry. Hey, man, prove it, and we'll pay you. So what are you really giving him that fifth option for? We're not gonna get into that, but just from an individual standpoint, there are players that I feel that need to make that necessary jump. And then I know we're gonna talk about it a little bit later as far as the punishment that came down on Jeff Ulbrich. That's a pressure on Jeff too. Yeah, I feel like that's a little bit added pressure. Like, okay, Raheem brought in his boy already tripping, or his boy's boy is already tripping, and he allowed his boy to start tripping. And hey, man, you gotta perform. And hey, we're giving you the tools, so no excuses. So yeah, I think their pressure, like Maria mentioned, there's a lot of pressure coming down on everyone. But yeah, it definitely has a trickle down effect when it comes to individual players, because there are guys playing for contracts. There's a coordinator willing to have to prove that he belongs and he was the right hire for this team. So yeah, it's a lot of pressure, enough pressure to go around. Excuse me.
Yeah. And real quick, you guys want to hop in on this one? We saw a question in the comments from Psycho. Are we expecting any improvement on offense, or is improving the defense supposed to be enough to get us to the playoffs? That was a question from one of our viewers, Flavius Hobbs. Thanks for the question. You guys want to hop in and give him your thoughts? Maria, since you saw that question, you want to jump in first?
Yeah, I mean, I fully expect this offense to get better, especially just from a consistency standpoint. You're not always like, well, what's going on? Who's it going to be? And now kind of like we talked about at the beginning of the show, like they have shown we've built the pieces in place to make this thing operate. They felt like the only thing missing was a quarterback. Now, they added a veteran quarterback in the hopes that eventually they get something else, and it happened to kind of transform itself a little bit earlier than maybe expected, which is why, back to the previous point of there being added pressure on Mike, this organization stuck their neck out for Mike, and they basically fell on the sword for one of the craziest moves in the first round we've seen in draft history. So yeah, the pressure's there for Mike. I just fully believe that Mike is the kind of guy that can handle pressure like this. And I do think you're going to see him take a step in the right direction in his sophomore year. Not hard to do because we didn't really see a lot from him. So you're going to get a much bigger sample size. So to me, that's automatic improvement. But just from the relationship that he has with his receivers, like that is just such a green flag for me with quarterbacks. And they all speak so highly of him when you don't even really necessarily ask directly about the relationship with him and his skill guys. It's just like oozing from all of these guys. Mike's the best. Mike's so talented. You know, you just hear that throughout the building so much right now. And I'm talking about Mike so much because he's really the focal point of this. We kind of know everything else aside from the centerpiece, like we talked about, but we kind of know what you get everywhere else. You've got two really phenomenal running backs. You have a bunch of skill guys that they've drafted very high over the last couple of years. And then, of course, the free agent pieces as well. And Darnell Mooney, I love what one of the coaches said yesterday when he said he kind of reintroduced himself to the league last year. Oh, I loved that because so many people have been down and out on Darnell, and all of a sudden he just looks like a different player here in Atlanta. So yeah, I fully expect this offense to get better. But I think the defense obviously has to take a step in the right direction. I don't think it's going to look night and day different. I hope it does, but kind of an unrealistic expectation with the young pieces that you have on defense, new play callers, all these things. However, I do believe both of them will do enough to make it look a lot better than it has in the past.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Go ahead, Free.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think the offense better look better because, like, the Falcons had the worst.
Better look better.
You know, for all the reasons that Maria and others have pointed out, like the standard is high for the offense, but like you had basically the NFL's worst play action passing attack last year, right? And when you look at the 14 teams that made the playoffs, 12 of those teams finished in the top 15 in play action passing offense. The two exceptions were the Kansas City Chiefs because they have Patrick Mahomes, and you can pretty much do whatever you want with Patrick Mahomes, and the Pittsburgh Steelers because they have the Steelers defense that has basically been a fixture in the top 5 of the NFL for 3 decades, right? And the Falcons do not have Patrick Mahomes, although I would love to be having that conversation about Michael Penix and Patrick Mahomes being on the same level at the end of the season. And they do not have the Steelers defense. So if the Falcons are going to be a playoff contender, their play action passing game has to make a significant leap. It has all the pieces there. You have Zach Robinson coming from that Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. These are the offenses that when you go and look at the top 10, 15 teams in play action passing, they're all McVay and Shanahan disciples. You come from a coaching tree that knows how to operate play action passing at a high level. We didn't see it last year for all the reasons that people want to say, Michael Penix's youth, Kirk Cousins' lack of mobility. It's got to be there this year. If it's not there this year, this team is not built to basically play a standard drop back passing game. Talking about Caleb McGarry, you do not want Caleb McGarry getting into a drop back passing game against Nick Bosa and some of these other guys 30, 35 times a game without that play action passing. This offense was built by Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot to be a play action run based offense. We saw the run. We didn't see the play action last year. We got to see those things this year for this offense to make a big step. So I do think, yes, we do expect an improvement from this offense. And to me, the play action passing game is going to be the centerpiece of that improvement if they do make the strides that they need to.
Yeah. To kind of echo what Maria and Free said, it has to be better, right? Because they've been teetering on this mid level of play for ever since Terry Fontenot has been here, right? We talked about he hasn't elevated his roster. I think that they have to elevate this roster from offensively by continuity, right? Because they've been to here. You got the OC coming back from his second year calling plays. And I talked to Zach yesterday, and he was just saying how it's so different now coming into his first year calling plays to coming into his second year calling plays. He said my mindset, thought process, everything is different. He's like,
I hope so.
I'm comfortable, right? Right. It better be, right? So he's comfortable now, coming into, having that comfort, knowing who's going to be the quarterback, knowing who his personnel is, and knowing, having some tape, to go off of in certain situations. I think this is going to be, like they have to be. I feel like that's how football works. You play next to someone, you get to know that person, you get to understand what he likes and what he does in particular situations. And when you have that quarterback play caller relationship, like look at the second year of Matt Ryan and Kyle Shanahan's offense. We saw what happened. It was a world of difference from the first year. So, Mike MPX didn't get that full season, but he did get a few games. So I think there's going to be some improvement for Michael Penix in this offense. We just don't know how much they're going to improve. So if they do improve a little bit, we know that, hey, they'll have a chance to get into the playoffs.
Yeah. Now save him from himself. Well, that kind of happened last Thursday. We'll take that under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Game Time, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Game Time makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%. So you can save that on not just sports, but concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the all-in pricing means no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So, Aaron, assistant GM Kyle Smith mentioned during Wednesday's press conference that if the Falcons had stayed at 46, they would have gone with an offensive player. So first things first, did Terry Fontenot trading up in the draft maybe save him from himself?
Well, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I thought the exact quote was, there was a world where we would have taken.
Yes. Yeah. That was the quote.
So it wasn't like him emphatically saying we were planning on taking an offensive player at 46. But I knew we were going to talk about this today because I knew the minute I saw that quote, this was going to trigger Jarvis Davis. And
you're welcome for getting him to say that, by the way.
It is a Jarvis Davis question. So,
yes. So, I mean, I'll try to be brief on this so we can give Jarvis the floor to explore the space of where he wants to go with this question. But,
no pressure.
Let's say yes. The answer to the question is yes, because we would have had a lot more confusion about the plan, right? Had the Falcons immediately gone to an offensive player in round 2. We talked about that in the run-up with some of the talk about, could they go for an offensive player in round 1? And of course, we knew with 100% certainty that was not going to happen. But the concern,
free guarantee.
Yes, the free guarantee. The concern was, would the Falcons, abandon ship when it came to their defensive draft-heavy plan in round 2 at that point in time? And so that was the main concern for many of us going into the draft. So, yeah, I do think based off of that, the Falcons being like, we got to go get our guy in James Pierce to double dip. I think did the research, the first time in 25 years that a team took 2 edge rushers in round 1 since the Jets did it with Sean Ellis and John Abraham back in 2000. I think
John Abraham.
It did save the Falcons from themselves from doing something that we all
that breaks the curse. Here. There we go.
The James Pierce trade up was a controversial pick, but I think taking any offensive player off the board at 46 would have been a far more controversial selection with that second draft selection than what they did. So yes, they saved themselves from themselves.
Jarvis, I know you have a lot to say, but can I say something really, really fast?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when we were in Flowery Branch together yesterday, Jarvis was up there and so was I. And Kyle said that in response to one of my questions, and it took everything in me not to turn around and look at Jarvis whenever he said that. So I'm really glad that I stay focused on the mission. After he said there was a world where we would have taken an offensive player, I was almost like, anyway, go ahead. I just thought that was so funny. I didn't tell you that yesterday, but I thought of you immediately as soon as he said it. I was like, oh, Jarvis is gonna have a field day.
I'm glad you thought of me, Maria. That makes my heart warm. But seriously though, when he was saying it, I felt a little pit in my stomach. It started to drop a little bit. It started like right up on my rib cage, and then it went to the bottom of my stomach. I was like, you mother Blanca, you mean to tell me that, y'all would have gone offensive player after all this talk from the owner on down, leading up to the draft? Oh, they talking probably, defensive players. We talked to all the defensive players. We talked nothing but defensive players. We had nothing but the defensive staff at the combine. Zach Robinson, went on vacation during the combine. You know what I'm saying? That's how confident we were. We're gonna take all defensive players. So yeah. It would have been so weird if they would have stayed at 15. They probably would have taken James Pierce. We know that, right? And they would have sat there in the second round at 46 with that dude still sitting on the board. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Free, yeah. You know that dude the Ravens got? Then the Ravens? No.
Say it with your chest.
Yeah, remind
Mike
me.
Green, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Mike Green, you know what I'm saying? Who? Mike Green?
Remind me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? So I probably would have lost it. I wouldn't have been gone as
Did
crazy.
you just do a Mike Jones reference in the middle of that?
Yeah, of course.
That was nuts.
I gotta slide a little some pop culture in. You know what I'm saying? That's how we get down on this show. We're gonna have a little fun and talk a little ball. But yeah, that's how we do. But I think that, be serious for a second. I think that I thought it was interesting the way Kyle Smith kind of broke it down as to explain how people, kind of viewed that particular, pick with James Pierce and doubling up because, hey, Dan Morgan, man, he is all right in my book. He said, man, you know what? We don't want Jalen. We're good. He fell, and the Falcons couldn't help themselves. They were like, you know what? In what world do we pass on Jalen Walker and select James Pierce? You know what I'm saying? Hey, so yeah, let's do that. And then let's get the other guy that we like too. I'm cool with that. I'm so cool with that because I feel like Jalen Walker's going to be a dude. But Smith explained it to the point where he said, okay, we just got our 2026 first round pick this year, which makes all the sense in the world because, hey, guess what? Terry ain't got time to be worried about next year. What did Maria say? Terry Fontenot's on the hot seat. Hey, Terry Fontenot, there's a sense of urgency in that front office. So who cares? Blank them picks. And guess what? They called Mr. Blank those picks himself and said, hey, man, we'll give you a first next year. Go ahead and trade out of the first round and let us get that third round pick too, because we know what we're going to do with that as well. We know what player we're going after in the third round. So yeah, man, I get a little frustrated when people get so focused in on assets, faceless assets. A 2026 first round pick. Who is it going to be? If they make the playoffs and it's going to be the 25th pick, it might be the same pick that they were the Rams would have picked if they hadn't traded a pick. So what are you going to get right there? Versus getting that guy that you see right now that's in front of your face and putting a name on it and saying, hey, here's our 2026 first round pick. We got our 2025 first round pick in Jalen Walker and saying, you know what, let's roll. Let's do it this year. Blank next year because I don't know if I'm going to be here. I'm going to set up and save assets for the next general manager. Man, blank him. I don't know who he is, but blank him. So, yeah, I'm with this whole, being intentional about getting the pass rush. And I think that, people just need to calm down a little bit on, oh, they gave up too much. Man, whatever, dude. If doggone James Pierce could go out there and get you 6 or 7 sacks in his rookie year, Jalen Walker get about 5.5, 6. Man, we're nobody going, and they'll probably be in the playoffs if that happens. We're not going to be talking about, oh man, the Falcons made the playoffs, won a division, Oh man, they don't have that first round pick in 2026. Man, who cares? Man, the Falcons have almost been a decade out the playoffs. Come on, man, what we talking about?
It's almost like in baseball, whenever a bunch of just random guys you've never heard of who are great prospects get traded, and everyone's like, "How could you give him up?" I'm like, "What do you mean? Like, if it works out later on in the future, it's great, but right now it doesn't matter." And I think one thing that is lost on fans sometimes is, for a year, probably more, we've been begging this front office to make aggressive moves in the draft. Okay, that happened. I mean, they literally were like, "Hey, I'm doing everything." Yes. Well, yeah, Mike included. But, moving back up into the first round, Terry had never done. Okay. And since he's been here. And they got 2 pieces of the missing puzzle on defense. And everybody was like, "Oh gosh, no, a first round pick next year." And that's what I never understood. And more to Jarvis's point, and kind of what we've been talking about, Terry essentially being, on the hot seat and having a lot of pressure. In his mindset, it's, I got to draft for my job. I got to draft aggressively. I got to get this thing right. And if I don't, it's somebody else's problem. So the thought process is, you move back up into the first round, you get a guy who is fast as hell, which you need on the defensive line, and a guy that had some character issues and whatever, nothing to the degree of Mike Green, but does he love the game? Whatever. All those things clearly were addressed, and they sought that out and got the information. So, okay, you knew that he was going to be slippery sloping down the draft boards because of these questions. But in your mind, you've done extra homework because they met with them right before the draft once again. And they said, this guy's going to be available. I'm going to go back up and get him. And guess what? We now have 2 guys who can make an immediate impact on defense. My dog agrees if you heard him bark. And I really think that this was such a slam dunk by Terry Fontenot and his crew. Now, nothing has been proven, but he literally did everything we've been begging him to do for a long time. And James Pierce Jr. is one of those modern day defensive ends who's like tall and long and fast. And you got him where Dex is freaking out. He's so excited about James Pierce Jr. I am so sorry. Dexter. Oh my gosh. Anyways, he hasn't done this in the history of the show, but now he's freaking out.
Terry Fontenot hasn't done this in his history. So Dexter, we understand.
Yeah. Dex, we get it, buddy. So yeah, and look, it was a dream scenario in the moment for the Falcons too, with Jalen Walker being available at 15. They're starting to think, is this all going to work out how we want it to? Dex is freaking out. I'm going to have to let somebody else talk. Go ahead.
No problem. Because look, I think this is how we all feel. And I believe you guys all said it in agreement in some way, shape, or form that, yeah, it would not have been okay for that world that they were referencing in the presser, wherein the Falcons would have drafted someone as high as 46, or hell, even going back for 26, but that's another story, to get an offensive player in the draft. And definitely, I think that everybody is okay with the fact that the Falcons went up to get James Pierce Jr. at 26, because it is about the now. The Falcons are out of time. Nobody thinking about 2026, because we're not having a conversation likely about Terry Fontenot or Raheem Morris in 2026 if 2025 doesn't work out. Well, Drake and 5. Y'all know what that means. We'll unpack that in Next Up. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles, including EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty, as easily as you stream your favorite shows. So what if you could jump into your favorite Xbox titles without needing your console in every room? How do you game when you're not in front of your main setup? Hotel stays, family visits, or even just the bedroom? Fire TV Stick 4K makes it possible to keep playing from almost anywhere. So head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller are required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max first and second gen, and Fire TV Cube third generation. So, Maria, it happened. The Falcons actually were able to. I kind of felt like it was scratching that itch on an offensive player, because while they didn't draft any offensive players at the top of the draft, one of the draft picks that we all know has been really worth his weight in salt is Drake London. And so the Falcons scratched their itch on offense by exercising his $16.8 million fifth-year option. So for you, was that a no-brainer to pick up Drake's option? And also, when you look at Drake, what does he have to do for you this upcoming season so that everyone around the league understands this guy is one of the premier receivers up and coming?
Dude, Drake is so underrated. And I don't know if it's because we cover him and we watch him every Sunday. I just keep thinking like, wow, this kid has really panned out to what the front office really thought he could be, making him a first-round pick when they did. He's coming off his first 1,000-yard year, and I just want him to continue that. And I think he was pretty quiet during the whole quarterback controversy last year and the switch from Kirk to Mike. And I think it's mostly because he has a lot of respect for both of them. And he did really build a really strong relationship with Kirk. And in his mind, you know, Kirk had unlocked something even better for Drake. But Drake is just becoming such a necessity, I would say, on offense. And that's what's really cool, to watch him mature into this role. He's got that dog in him, like we've talked about in the past, which there's not a lot of guys on this offense that have that. So he's got the edge, he's got the talent, and he is not afraid to put his shoulder down and get dirty either. I mean, whoa, he's so fun to watch. He's like transformed and unlocked something in his game that I think's been just a joy to watch. And I think it was absolutely 100% a no-brainer for a guy like Drake. And I hope that he's here for a long time, to be honest.
Yeah. And Maria, you make a great point about the fact that sometimes we have the good fortune of watching players up front and knowing what they're capable of. But I think too, and maybe that's why we're a little bit biased, and I use that term loosely because I think he's that good. I don't think we're actually biased here. But on the same token, I think those same numbers from a year ago, 100 receptions, I mean, that's not anything to just go, oh yeah, that's not pedestrian at all. That's still very much one of those milestones, or one of those bars that you set as a high end or a top end receiver. 1,200, almost 1,300 yards, 9 touchdowns, and averaging, which I think is very, very important, almost 13 yards a catch. I mean, Jarvis, those are the types of numbers where you would hear him in that conversation of elite receivers, but a little young. So, you know, you kind of want to see, I'm sure the league wants to see if that's something that can be put on repeat, which I think it will be with Michael Penix Jr. But I also think you've got to be on a winning team that at some point won, because even the receivers that are on losing teams, like maybe the Bengals were in the first half of last season, well, you're going to still talk about Jamar, because Jamar had already established himself on a winning team with a winning organization. I think part of it is, if this offense really shows and proves like they're supposed to, there's going to be more than enough conversation about Drake London, and more than enough conversation about him already proving that he earned and deserved that fifth-year option being picked up.
1,000%. And the thing that I like about Drake, you know, here are the quarterbacks that he's played for since he's come in.
This is
Marcus
a great
Mariota, Desmond Ridder, Kirk Cousins, which was a nice combination until things fell off the rails, and then Michael Penix.
Taylor Heineke erasure, Jarvis. How dare you, sir?
Say again?
Taylor Heineke erasure, you know. Don't forget.
Who was that?
Yeah, okay.
What does he do? Did he throw the football?
Yeah, he
threw the football for the oh yeah, that's right. Taylor Heineke. Yeah, that's gonna help further prove my point.
Yes.
So, and we never heard anyone, not a fan, not anybody, say, "Oh man, look at the quarterback Drake playing with. He got no good quarterback, so that's why he haven't been productive." No, it don't work like that in the league. Drake London has been productive enough to be in the conversations with Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. By the way, those are our receivers that had over 100 catches and over 1,200 yards receiving last year in 2024. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about, that type of stuff. Yeah, give him that fifth-year option, So that's why I was not surprised at all. And I think that Drake is a guy that, he doesn't look like a dog. I ain't going to go into reasons why, but he is one. Like Free, this is a
Free, we can hear you laughing.
We can't have this conversation on this show right now. Yeah, you have to understand where I'm coming from and know where I'm coming from right now, because I don't want to go down that road. That's why Free is shaking his head right now. But yeah, Drake is one of those dudes. He's from Cali, and he understands just for the whole go back to the Clark Phillips situation. Just when he responded to questions about Clark Phillips, just look at him. He's one of those dudes. He's one of those dudes. And for the Falcons to pick up that fifth-year option, I'm not surprised at all. But yeah, I'm excited about Drake this year. Just a full year with Mike. Oh man, this is
great.
Like 26, 27 points. Let's go.
Yeah. And I think, Jarvis, this excitement, I feel like it's still a little bit different from the excitement that we had with Kirk Cousins, because we actually had an opportunity to see a sneak peek of Michael Penix Jr. and Drake London, like full on. Like with Kirk, we were projecting what he could be because he was Kirk Cousins with Drake London in that offense. But we saw a little something with Michael Penix Jr. and Drake London, and we're like, ooh, if Zach Robinson can get in the lab for a whole offseason, put a few more pieces together and give MPX the opportunity to really grow into QB1, it could be scary. I mean, it really, really could be scary. And Free, that's why I think that A, it made sense to pick up the fifth-year option, but B, that everybody around the league, not just locals of those who cover them, will be having a conversation about this tandem.
Yeah, I think it was a no-brainer, as everybody else has said. I think there are three things that Drake London needs to do in order to get more national recognition. There are certainly people in the national media that do recognize how good Drake London is, but he's probably not sort of the immediate names that when you're rattling off who are the top receivers in the NFL, we think of Jamar Chase, we think of Justin Jefferson, we think of, Tyreek Hill and some of these other guys. He doesn't automatically come into that conversation. And I think the three things that he needs to do, or, some of it he's not always in control of, is the team needs to win. Going back to Maria's point, that when you can perform in January, people go like, oh, that guy's pretty good, right? And then I think the other thing that you didn't see nearly as much last year that we've seen from Drake in the past, but we just didn't see it consistently outside of maybe that Eagles game where he was beating Darius Slay. You didn't see Drake matched up against a lot of sort of number one corners that are some of these high profile guys and going off against them. And so this year when they're facing guys like Sauce Gardner and other guys like that on that level, Marshawn Lattimore, if Drake can have big games in those games, I think more people will take notice, because it's like, oh man, did you see what Drake did to Sauce last week and whatnot? And then I think the third thing is sort of piggybacking on those 2 points is, you saw Drake kind of be more of the possession guy and more of the red zone threat for this Falcons offense, being that Mr. Reliable guy in those do or die situations. We know Drake can do that. I think the thing that you need to see more of this year is more of the explosive plays. Now, we saw in the Week 18 game, we've seen it in the past with some of those 50-50 balls that the Falcons like to throw down the field with Drake London. So the ability is all there. It's just you need to see that maybe a little bit more consistently, being that guy that is getting those 20, 30, 40-yard plays on a more weekly basis, rather than what we saw last year where you didn't really see that from Drake until the tail end of the season when Penix got in. So if you can see kind of that for a full season, then I think, a lot more people will be like, hey, who's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL is that Drake London guy. I'll take him, right after I take Justin Jefferson or whoever people put at the top of their list or whatnot. And so I think if those things happen, you will see a lot more people outside of the state of Georgia talking about Drake London being one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Yeah,
because he's certainly done what he was supposed to do to make sure he's in that conversation in 2022. 2023, 24. And granted, the number of receptions kind of took a step back in 23, but it was ever so slight, by the way. But the yards went up, the average per catch went up. And now, of course, had a nice little, we'll call it an explosion for what we saw with the Falcons offense in 2024 versus what he did. He literally almost doubled what he did combined in last season for what he did the first couple of seasons. But like you said, I think when you start matching up against, and Aaron, that's a great point, when you start matching up against some of the best cover guys in the league and you're able to go toe-to-toe with them and win those battles on a consistent basis, I think that's a huge piece. I think he's also already shown that he's good in clutch situations, just continue to be good in more clutch situations. And Falcons give him an opportunity to shine. I mean, I think if Zach Robinson and that Falcons offense does its job, then this is automatic for Drake London to be in the conversation of the top 10 receivers or top 8 receivers around the league at the end of the 2025 season. Now, the NFL made a decision about some things that we have heard more than enough about in this last week. But the question becomes, did the penalty fit the crime? We'll talk about that on the other side. So, Jarvis, the NFL decided to fine the Falcons and Jeff Ulbrich for the involvement in the Shedeur Sanders prank call. Of course, that saw Jeff's son Jax prank Shedeur on draft night, I think posing as a scout from the Saints team or an official from the Saints organization. The team, of course, the Falcons, the team was fined $250,000. Jeff Ulbrich was hit with a $100,000 penalty. But first things first, let's talk about the penalty that hit the Falcons, because honestly, I think that's the one that's been most controversial. $250,000 that was levied against the franchise. In your opinion, was that penalty fair?
I don't think so, because I think the if you're talking about intent and being malicious, I guess so. But I look back to the penalty for the whole tampering, right? Like not reaching out to players and having communication with players before you're supposed to. Those fines weren't that extreme, because I feel like this is a overall thing when it comes to NFL, especially once Roger Goodell came into the league. He was supposed to be putting the hammer down and getting everybody right and doing, letting down the letter of the law and all that stuff. And I think it was just a little bit too much. So I feel like it may have been too much, like overall, since Goodell has been in office, right? And I think this is the case. This is true for this particular case as well. So I think that when I saw it, I kind of wasn't really paying attention to the fine, the number, because I feel like this is just jacked up for Jeff Ulbrich and the Falcons as an organization too, because I feel like Jeff Ulbrich is a solid dude, just from my interactions with him and speaking with him and everything like that. So it sucks that he has to stand up and basically fall on the sword, because we haven't seen Jax come out and say he put an apology on Instagram. Sure, he reached out to Shedeur, and the Sanders family and apologized to them as well. But he hadn't had to speak publicly on this. So yeah, for me, I feel like it was just a little bit too much from a monetary standpoint, because I feel like tampering is more severe than your son getting his hands on a contact info and committing a prank call. So yeah, this thing's had so many layers to it. I just feel like too much on financially, and then I think the league just really not knowing how to handle these situations, because allegedly they sent out email confidentially and labeled it confidential, and then they sent out Shedeur's contact info to all of the assistants in the NFL, and they didn't label it as confidential, and they just sent it out. So yeah, it's just so many layers to this thing, and I feel like ultimately the NFL probably did a little bit too much, and I think that it's unfortunate that Jeff and his son Jax did something that Jeff had to basically fall on the sword publicly about it.
Yeah, Maria, what are your thoughts on? Let's just start with the fine for the Falcons, the $250,000 that was levied against the organization. Fair or no?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the fine's aggressive. Look, I mean, it's a really unfortunate situation for all parties. Jarvis and I actually talked about it a little bit after Brick talked to everybody, and I got to be honest with you. I feel really bad for Jeff Ulbrich. I do, and of course I feel bad for Shedeur, and like no one should ever have to go through something like that. It's the biggest, most important day of your life. And it's not just Shedeur. There's other draft prospects that have been going through the same thing. And it has happened in the past before. This is just a little bit more publicized because of who Shedeur is and who his dad is. And, they're live streaming the draft process. And so in a way, this will shine a light on this is actually an issue. Like this kind of happens every year. People just don't really come out and talk about it as much. And again, like there's no excuse for what he did. I mean, it's awful. I don't even know what he thought was going to happen. I don't know how that crosses your mind as to, hey, this is going to be a great idea to steal this number off my dad's iPad, give it to the friend who we know nothing about. The friend does the call and there's other people in the room recording it and posting it. Like the whole thing is dumb. It's awful. And I can't imagine being Jeff Ulbrich, who, that's your family. Like my husband is a coach. I can't imagine breaking trust like that in any scenario. And you don't think that your family would ever do something like that, let alone something as malicious as pretending to draft a kid on the biggest day of his life. It's crazy. And Jeff, I think in his statement to everybody from the Falcons facility was very sincere. You could tell he was very emotional. I can't imagine how hard that was for him to do. I'm glad that they were able to talk to Shedeur and Dion. That was important. It's just even more insane that, Shedeur is related to someone who's in the Falcons Ring of Honor. And it's such a stab in the back in so many different levels that Jax did this. But the NFL's never been uniform, kind of going to Jarvis's point. Like there's no consistency when it comes to punishment in the NFL, which I kind of have a big problem with. And it sucks. Like $250,000 doesn't feel like a lot to a franchise, but you do not have like this uniform. Hey, we're going to fine you $100,000 for this and $250,000 for this. And so I think messaging kind of gets lost in a lot of the things that the NFL comes down on. We can get into the fine of Jeff, which I want everyone to remember. $100,000 for a defensive coordinator is a lot of money. So, the whole thing is a mess. I think that they need to, or they're probably thinking the NFL needs to come out with something severe so that this doesn't happen ever again. That's the message, and that's the message they're trying to send. And gosh, we hope so. Even Sanu came out on Twitter and was like, this happened to me, by the way, on my draft night. And think about when that was. So, these are things that just, I'm glad people are talking about and being like, hey, this is not right. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing sucks. And I just don't know on what planet you think that that's a good idea.
Yeah, it is. It's a lose-lose all the way around. And when you look at it, Free, sure, $250,000 to the Falcons is probably a drop in the bucket, but it does still beg the question of whether or not, in the general scheme of things, relative to fines levied for other infractions, whether or not this is actually the punishment fitting the crime.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it from how much the Falcons are worth, I believe that they've been valued at about $5 billion. If you were to translate that to a more reasonable amount of money that the rest of us can fathom, if you say that's $5,000, this fine basically amounts to them paying a quarter. So not a big deal to $1 billion corporation like the Atlanta Falcons. As Maria said, it is a much bigger deal for Jeff Ulbrich because, I've heard various people tell me what his salary is, probably $1 million and so, or more. So you're talking about potentially 10% of your salary going to a fine. That's a significant chunk of change. I tend to think as far as NFL fines go, and as Maria pointed out, there's no consistency. It's just like a dictatorship where Roger Goodell says, I will smite you and I will smite you and I will leave you alone. I feel like this is relatively fair for the NFL because I just feel like, as Maria said, they tend to try to make an example of teams. I think they are trying to make an example of the Atlanta Falcons for basically not being on their P's and Q's when it comes to handling confidential information, which, in the world today, that's something that's important, whether you're looking at things like, hospital records and HIPAA and all these various things. You need to be, responsible for those things, particularly if you're an organization. It's a hefty fine for that specific issue. And given the prank call, as Maria said, these are common occurrences with multiple players every single year. And so, is this the one that's like, oh, well, this is we're going to send a message that's going to now stop this? No, it's not going to stop it. Just maybe it will stop people from recording their prank calls and uploading them to the internet for millions and billions of people to see. If you're going to do the crime, don't leave a paper trail of evidence towards the crime. But, we'll see on that. So I just think, I think as far as the sort of inconsistent, unfair NFL fines go, this fits into that. But I feel like this is, the NFL has to send its message. And unfortunately, the Atlanta Falcons far too often are on the receiving end of the NFL deciding, hey, we got to make an example out of something for this organization. And, maybe, just maybe, this is enough money that will finally stop for this organization and stop embarrassing themselves. That's all I ask for. Win football games and stop embarrassing. That's all I want.
Yeah, that's what I felt too. I felt like when I heard the word fair, it was my answer was kind of on different levels, right? Fair as in, well, if you stop doing this ish and you stop allowing ish like this to happen, then we wouldn't be having the conversation of whether or not it's fair. But let's just be real. It's almost like a moving target, right? Almost like it reminds me of basketball where some players get calls, some don't. It's like the Falcons always seem to be the ones that get hit. Everybody else gets a tap on the hand. The Falcons get hit over the head with a baseball bat.
Are you calling the Falcons the Draymond Green of the NFL?
Essentially, wow. Yeah. Go on with that. Yeah, that's right. Or Trey Young, because he said
I thought you were thinking about Trey.
Exactly. They might be more like the Trey Young of the NFL as an organization, because they always get meted the harsh treatment, as he says he doesn't get the calls. But on the same token, I thought back to like my corporate America days, and to me, it's fair because you're the franchise, you're the organization, so the responsibility invariably falls on you to make sure that your employees do what they're supposed to do. So the Falcons were always going to get the heavier fine because you're the employer, right? And so, but we know Arthur Blank, he's a kind and gentle spirit. I could see him just somehow figuring out how to write Jeff Ulbrich a $100,000 bonus check and making that go away, because that is a lot on a defensive coordinator based on his salary. But I think ultimately it's fair only because, again, from my corporate America days, you're taking an L as a company because that's your damn employee. That's the way that it goes down. That's the way it's seen. And that's the way that's always going to be. That said, I also think that fine came down like that because of all those nuances that we talked about, the little nuances of the connectivity, the connection points in people's heads about Deion Sanders, arguably the most recognizable, greatest Falcon, most popular Falcon ever. And you do this from an extension of your organization towards his son. Not cool, not at all. Also, all the pressure that was coming on, hey, is there collusion in the league about what happened with Shedeur Sanders in terms of his draft status? So is this kind of like a little mea culpa, like another thing that happened to this kid as a part of this draft that we can control the narrative on? There might be a little something there that's an undertone of like, let's try to balance things out and make sure they don't think we're unfair against Shedeur as a league as well on how we mete out the penalty for this particular egregious. So fair relative term. But real quick, guys, I know you talked about whether or not you thought the penalty was fair for the Falcons. Was it fair for Ulbrich, his $100,000 penalty, Jarvis?
I don't think so. No, I don't think the fines from a numerical standpoint, like, with the 250 for the organization, with the 100, maybe it should have been 150. I mean, 100 for the organization and 50 or 75 for a Jeff Ulbrich. I think that probably would have been closer to being fair. But yeah, I like 10% of your salary potentially. Yeah, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of bread. People don't like to pay tithes, and God asked for 10%, and people don't like to pay that. So yeah, it's a lot of money. Yeah, it's a lot of money. It's called commitment, and I don't think Jeff wants to commit 10% of his salary to his son making a dumb decision.
Yeah, and not to mention the fact that these guys all have agent fees as well, right?
Sure. Yep.
So, you see Jeff's base salary and then you take the agent fee out of it and then you take $100,000. Like, that sucks.
And
That
then
sucks
Uncle
so
Sam too.
bad.
Uncle Sam got to get his too. So yeah,
Right, like after taxes, and Georgia can be expensive with some of this stuff, and it's just like, it adds up. And that's not saying that there shouldn't be punishment. Like, it, unfortunately for Jeff, this happened, unfortunately his son took the number. It's not like he was like, hey, here's the number, I think you should do this. Gosh, in what world would Jeff ever, again, like, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. I think people forget sometimes, like, you see all these numbers, like Kirk Cousins numbers with a contract, like, coaches don't make that, and especially not assistant coaches. And that's not an excuse. I think $100,000 is crazy. Now, Jeff even towards the end of the press conference, he even said, like, I will promise you and I can guarantee you there is going to be punishment. They've taken accountability, responsibility, all of those things. But he's going to make sure that his son is doing all of the right things to try to correct the wrong internally. He can't do anything else. Like, the damage is done. He's apologized. Like, all of that is finished. So, whether that's taking courses on how to be a better person, however he wants to handle it. Like, Jackson's never going to get an opportunity to work in the NFL. There's, that if that was a dream of his, like, that's not going to happen. So that costs a lot of money if you think about it that way. There's a lot of ways, I think, that you could probably manipulate what you think is punishment in this scenario rather than $100,000 from your dad's paycheck. And I told Jarvis yesterday, like, I would be setting up a GoFundMe to my kid now. Like, hey, you're going to pay this back over time. It's you've got to respond for the consequences of your actions. It's so unfortunate. I wish more people would realize, like, when you see the Kirk Cousins salary, like, Jeff ain't there.
Yeah. And I think that the community service part of it, maybe, hopefully, that Jax has to perform is the right type of community service, because I'm telling you, if he performs the right type of community service, which is a part of what his culpability is for this, it should be not as much of not as sobering as money, but sobering enough to say, stay the heck away from things like this in your future, because I mean, you're destroying not just your hopes, dreams, and aspirations, but you don't know what type of asterisk this may continue to be against Jeff Ulbrich as he tries to build his NFL career. Aaron, wrap us up with what you think about where this thing ended with Jeff Ulbrich and whether or not it was fair.
Yeah, man. As everybody else said, paying six figures because your son did the dumbest thing possible is a huge L to take. So it's hard to say it's fair when you look at sort of somebody else's idiotic decision leading to you losing a big chunk of money, as we discussed. So it doesn't feel fair, but again, the NFL is going to put the hammer down on somebody. That's what they do. And rarely do we sit here and say, oh, that punishment fit the crime and whatnot. So I think this is another example of that. But at the end of the day, it probably could have been worse.
Yeah, definitely could have been worse. And at least we still are just a week removed from the Falcons taking a defensive player in the first round and taking 4 of 5 players in the 2025 draft overall. Just had to say that so we could end on a positive. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with your host Aaron Freeman as your second listen. Check out Maria Martin, host of Sports Extra on Sundays on 11 Alive. And check out our guy Jarvis, who is a frequent contributor for Locked On Falcons and Sports Extra. We'll see you next time.